The karate champion standing on stage had no idea who he had just pointed at. The event organizers didn't know either. The three judges behind the scoring table had no clue. The 300 people packed into the Sheridan Park Hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C. didn't know. Only 4 people in that entire room understood who the small man sitting quietly in the third row really was. Just moments earlier, the champion had called him the little guy. He had invited him up on stage to serve as a human prop, someone to demonstrate techniques on. The man weighed about 135 pounds. He looked like an ordinary spectator who had wandered in to watch. What happened over the next 11 minutes would shock everyone in that room. Before the night was over, the most dominant point fighter in American karate would be embarrassed in front of the very people he wanted to impress most. His perfect record, his famous kick, his reputation, 11 years of dominance, all of it would crumble because he randomly chose a man from the audience and assumed he was harmless. He chose the wrong person. It was March 14, 1964. Washington, D.C., the Sheridan Park Hotel, Saturday night. The grand ballroom had been turned into a makeshift martial arts arena. Folding chairs formed circles around a raised wooden platform. Bright lights hung overhead. The air carried the smell of polished floors, sweat, and stale coffee. This was the National Karate Championship, not the largest tournament in America, but close. Competitors had come from 9 states, representing 7 different styles: Shotokan, Goju Ryu, Kenpo, Asian Ryu Tang, Sudo Taekwondo, Wado Ryu, and more. Around 300 people filled the room: fighters, referees, coaches, families, and nearly everyone involved in the East Coast karate scene. The event had started at 9 that morning, 12 straight hours of matches. The crowd was tired, but still buzzing with energy. The final event of the night was about to begin, a special demonstration by the guest of honor, Victor Moore. In 1964, if you followed karate in America, you knew that name. Victor Moore wasn't just good, he was feared. He had won 33 tournaments in a row. Not 33 matches, 33 full tournaments, first place every time. 11 straight years without a single loss. His entire strategy revolved around one weapon, his right leg side kick. It was unbelievably fast. He could launch it from a completely relaxed standing position. No warning, no wind-up, no visible movement. 1 second he stood still. The next, his foot was buried in your chest and you were staring at the ceiling. Referees had timed it at under 0.3 of a second from stillness to full extension. Fighters said they never saw it coming, they only felt it, then they were on the floor, confused, trying to figure out what just hit them. Some compared it to being struck by a car door that suddenly swings open, flat, powerful, and impossible to predict. Victor stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed about 220 pounds, long arms, even longer legs. His reach advantage was so extreme that facing him felt like trying to box someone through a window. You couldn't get close enough to touch him, but he could hit you whenever he wanted. That night, he was simply supposed to demonstrate that famous kick, maybe break a few boards, maybe do a short, controlled sparring display, accept the applause, shake hands, go home. That was the plan. Victor stood on the raised platform in a spotless white gi, his black belt wrapped neatly around his waist. A microphone rested in his right hand. He had already been introduced, already received a standing ovation, already thanked the organizers, the judges, and his fellow competitors. Now he was doing what champions do best, performing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and confident, the voice of a man who never needed to shout. "Tonight I want to show you something. Something that will change the way you think about speed and the way you think about power." 300 people leaned forward in their metal chairs.
My sidekick is considered the fastest technique in American martial arts. That's not just my opinion. The record proves it. 33 tournaments, 33 first-place finishes, and not once has anyone blocked this kick. The crowd applauded. It was respectful. It was earned. Then Victor made a choice that would follow him for the rest of his career. I don't want to demonstrate on a heavy bag. Anyone can kick a bag. I want to show you what this looks like against a real person, someone standing in front of me, trying to stop it. He paused and scanned the room. I need a volunteer. Any style, any rank. Come up here and try to block my kick. I'll pull it back before full contact. No one will get hurt. I just want you to see what real speed looks like against a real target. Silence. No one stood up. The experienced fighters in the room knew better than to test themselves against Victor Moore's kick. The confident ones quickly ran the numbers in their heads and didn't like the odds. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The awkwardness became thick. The champion had issued a challenge, and no one answered. Victor smiled wider. He liked this part, the hesitation, the tension. It proved his reputation before he even moved. Then his eyes landed on someone in the third row. A small, young Asian man sat very still while the people around him shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't wearing a gi, no belt, no patches, nothing that suggested he practiced martial arts, just dark pants and a dark shirt. He looked like a regular spectator who had wandered in to watch. But what something about him stood out. It wasn't his size, it was the way he was watching. He wasn't watching for entertainment, he was studying, like a mechanic examining an engine, quietly taking it apart in his mind piece by piece. Victor didn't think long about it. He needed someone. This man would do. Small enough to make the moment dramatic, ordinary enough to make the crowd nervous. The contrast would be perfect. The audience would see the size difference, they'd hold their breath, and when Victor's kick flashed past the man's face, stopping just short, the room would explode with applause. Great theater. Victor pointed. You, the small one, third row. Want to see the fastest kick in America up close? A few people chuckled. Victor was still smiling. The man in the third row did not smile. He looked at Victor, then at the finger pointed at him, then at the stage, the judges, the audience. He calmly took in the entire situation. Then he said one word. Sure. He said it the way someone agrees to pass the salt. No excitement, no nerves, no drama. The man sitting beside him, a compact Filipino martial artist named Dan Inosanto, grabbed his arm and leaned in. Bruce, don't. Bruce turned his head toward his friend. His expression stayed the same. He gently removed Dan's hand. He asked, Bruce said quietly. It would be rude not to answer. Dan closed his eyes for a moment. He knew what was about to happen. Not to Bruce, to Victor Moore. Bruce Lee stood up and began walking toward the stage. He moved through the rows the way water moves through stones, smooth, steady, unhurried. People shifted their legs to let him pass, barely giving him a second glance. To them, he was just a small man volunteering for a demonstration, nothing special. In 1964, Bruce Lee was practically invisible in America. No magazine covers, no movie roles, no television fame. He was 23 years old and ran a small martial arts school in Oakland, California. He taught a South Chinese system called Wing Chun to a small group of students. Born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, he had returned to the United States at 18 with little money, a few clothes, and a level of fighting skill that few Americans had ever seen. He wasn't at the tournament as a competitor, not as a star, not even as a featured guest. He was there as a favor. Ed Parker, the Hawaiian-born martial artist who organized many major West Coast events, had seen Bruce give a small demonstration in Los Angeles months earlier.
What Ed Parker had witnessed months earlier in Los Angeles had unsettled him. For 3 nights, he could barely sleep.
He had called friends across the martial arts world and repeated the same message. There's a young man from Hong Kong. What he can do shouldn't be possible, but he does it anyway. You need to see him. That young man was now walking toward the stage. Ed Parker was seated in the front row that night. He was the one who had invited Bruce to attend this East Coast Championship, not to compete, not to challenge anyone, just to observe, meet people, and get a feel for American karate culture. Certainly not to fight the most feared point fighter in the country. When Parker saw Victor Moore point directly at Bruce, his stomach tightened. He leaned toward the man beside him and whispered, barely audible, "Oh no." The man frowned. "What?" "That's Bruce Lee." "Who's Bruce Lee?" Ed paused. How could he explain it in a few words? How could he describe what he had seen in Los Angeles in one short sentence? Finally, he said quietly, "Victor just made the biggest mistake of his life." Bruce reached the stage, climbed the 3 wooden steps, and walked to the center. For the first time, Victor Moore and Bruce Lee stood face to face. The difference between them was striking. Victor stood 6 feet 3, weighing around 220 pounds. Bruce was about 5'7" and 135 pounds. Victor's white gi was crisp and perfectly pressed, his black belt wrapped tightly round his waist, a symbol of years of rank and recognition. Bruce wore simple dark pants and a fitted dark shirt, no belt, no patches, no school name, nothing that signaled status. He looked more like someone who had wandered in from the audience by accident. Victor extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Victor noticed 2 things immediately. First, Bruce's grip was surprisingly strong for someone his size, not crushing, but solid and steady, like gripping a piece of warm steel. Second, Bruce's forearms were unusually thick and defined, the arms of someone who trained his hands with purpose hour after hour. Victor dismissed both thoughts. Strong hands didn't stop side kicks. Muscular forearms didn't close a 7-inch height gap. "What's your name, my friend?" asked Victor. "Bruce Lee." The name meant nothing to him. Victor had never heard it in the American karate circuit, and why would he have? He was the one everyone talked about. "Do you practice martial arts?" "Yes." "What style?" "Chinese martial arts." Victor nodded, though he already had an opinion. In 1964, much of the American karate community saw kung fu as flashy but ineffective. Elegant movements, animal poses, silk uniforms, impressive in demonstrations, but supposedly useless when faced with real speed and real force. Victor turned to the audience, lifting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brave volunteer, Bruce Lee. He practices Chinese martial arts. Let's give him a round of applause for his courage." The crowd clapped politely. Many felt sorry for the smaller man. They assumed he didn't fully understand what he had signed up for. They expected him to get a close-up lesson from the fastest kick in American karate. Victor turned to Bruce and lowered his voice. "Listen," he said quietly. "I'll hold back. I won't hit you. Just stand there and react. Try to block or dodge. Do what your training tells you, all right?" Bruce nodded. "Don't worry," Victor added with a confident smile. "It'll be over quickly." Bruce looked up at the man who stood half a foot taller and 75 pounds heavier, a man undefeated for 11 years, a man with a kick no one had ever blocked. "Yes," Bruce said calmly. Something in his tone made Victor hesitate for a split second. It wasn't confidence. Victor knew confidence well. He lived on it. What he heard in Bruce's voice was something quieter, something deeper. Certainty. Victor pushed the feeling aside. He stepped back and took his fighting stance. "I'm ready when you are," Bruce said. But Bruce hadn't taken a stance at all. He stood relaxed in the center of the platform, feet shoulder-width apart, hands resting calmly at his sides. No guard, no visible defense, just stillness. Bruce stood there completely relaxed, arms down, shoulders loose, wide open. He looked more like someone who was waiting for a bus. All 300 people in the ballroom held their breath. The judges leaned forward. Ed Parker pressed his palms together in the front row. Dan Inosanto, sitting back in the third row, covered his eyes with one hand, then spread his fingers because he couldn't not look. Victor Moore, 33-time undefeated champion, the fastest kick in American martial arts, 6'3", 220 pounds of tested, proven power, shifted his weight, inhaled sharply, and fired his legendary sidekick at the smaller man in street clothes. What happened next lasted less than a second, but it would be talked about for decades. A moment later, the ballroom exploded. 300 voices all at once, arguments between rows, fighters shaking their heads trying to make sense of what they had just seen. Some stood up, others grabbed the shoulders of the people next to them. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer polite tournament energy. This was something sharper, charged, unsettling. It was the feeling that fills a room when a deeply held belief has just been shaken and no one knows what to believe anymore. On stage, Victor Moore and Bruce Lee stood about 3 feet apart. Victor's chest rose and fell heavily, not from physical exhaustion, but from something else, the effort of adjusting his self-image in front of 300 witnesses. Bruce stood calm and still. No grin, no celebration, no theatrics. He looked like a doctor who had just delivered a diagnosis, composed and patient, understanding that it takes time for people to absorb new information. Ed Parker rose from his seat. He understood the moment. He knew that when 300 dedicated martial artists have their worldview challenged, things can turn in 1 to 2 directions, curiosity or anger. He needed to guide the room toward curiosity. Parker walked onto the stage and gently took the microphone from Victor's hand. Victor let it go without protest. His demonstration was over. "Ladies and gentlemen," Parker began, his voice warm but steady, the voice of a man who had spent years building connections between different martial arts communities. "What you have just witnessed is extraordinary." He gestured toward Bruce. "For those who don't know him, this is Bruce Lee. He's a martial arts instructor from Oakland, California. He teaches Wing Chun Kung Fu and a personal system he has developed called Jeet Kune Do." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Most had never heard those names before. "Mr. Lee," Parker continued, "would you be willing to explain what we just saw? Perhaps demonstrate some of the principles behind your approach?" Bruce scanned the room. 300 faces stared back at him, some curious, some doubtful, some clearly irritated. He could feel it. These were serious karate practitioners. Many had trained for years, even decades, mastering their art. And now a smaller man in street clothes had just exposed what looked like a weakness. That was hard to accept. Bruce understood that feeling. Years earlier in Hong Kong, his own assumptions had been challenged in the same way. "I'd be happy to," he said. Parker handed him the microphone. For the next 20 minutes, Bruce Lee gave an unplanned talk and demonstration that would echo through martial arts circles for the next 60 years. He began calmly and respectfully. He had no interest in insulting karate, no desire to dismiss anyone's training. He simply wanted to show something different and let people decide for themselves. "What you just saw," Bruce said in a clear, steady voice that carried effortlessly across the ballroom, "was not magic, not special talent, not luck." He paused. "It was physics." A few people shifted in their seats. "Simple physics," he continued, "applied to the human body in a way that many traditional systems do not emphasize." He nodded toward Victor. "Mr. Moore has an excellent sidekick, truly excellent, fast, powerful, technically precise." Victor gave a small, tight nod. "But every technique," Bruce went on, "has structure, and structure has patterns." He let that settle in. "In most traditional kicks, whether in karate, taekwondo, or kung fu, there is always a preparation, a shift of weight, a turn of the hip, a slight movement before the strike.